No, we found out that North Carolina voted to not sue Florida State. Now, why would they do that and side against the ACC?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and so much more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Lots coming up. The Pac-12, or Pac-2, if you will. FanDuel finally gave us some win totals for them. So what comes next? What do they look for now? And also, speaking of the Pac-12, Arizona's in the Big 12. What's their ceiling? What's the maximum number of games Arizona can win? We'll talk about that coming up today. But we start with North Carolina and Brian Windhorst. Ever a recurring metaphor or analogy that I reference here on the show, because so many times when these stories get released, you can do the Brian Windhorst. For those listening on podcasts, 2 fingers out. Now, why would they do that? Everybody peers in. I don't know, Brian. Why would they do that? I don't know. I'm just saying it's curious. This is the case again. So, according to the Tampa Bay Times, reporting over there by Matt Baker, so the ACC decided to file a lawsuit, right? So they, of course, didn't do that just at headquarters. They consulted the members that were remaining who were not suing to leave the league, as in, everybody not named Florida State. And they said, hey, do you want to go forward with this lawsuit? And everybody said, yeah, we want to sue. We want to keep Florida State around because they're incredibly valuable, and that'd be in the best interests of our league. That's plain and obvious. And then you learned, Clemson didn't vote to do anything along those lines. And, well, that's not surprising because Clemson has since brought a lawsuit of its own. But North Carolina didn't vote in that sequence. Now, there's a difference between voting against, not voting, but abstaining, not voting, and voting against, all kind of the same outcome. It's not a yes vote. So that is the cause of today's Brian Windhorst. Why would they do that? Why would North Carolina decide, no, we don't think the ACC, and we don't want this conference to try and keep one of its most valuable television members? Is it because they want the league to collapse? Is it because they want chaos to ensue? They want it to be a free-for-all, and they want to go try and find a home in the Big Ten or in the SEC? Maybe. I mean, that would be new television territory for either of those conferences, but do they want to leave the ACC? Do they? Kind of looks like they do. Maybe, possibly. Now, there is another interpretation. You can read this a different way. According to the article that I referenced, quote, there is, however, an extenuating circumstance. The minutes list Kevin Guskevitz, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, as North Carolina's absent director and the board's vice chair. Guskevitz was leaving his position as North Carolina's chancellor to become the president of Michigan State, where he formally started in March. This meeting was during Lee H. Roberts' first day as UNC's interim chancellor. Is that the reason that they voted to abstain, that they didn't take part in this particular process? If you would like to interpret it that way, you may go ahead and do so. To me, that is would be a convenient cop-out for why North Carolina said, essentially, we don't want to be on the ACC side of countersuing Florida State, who are trying to leave the conference. The reason I say that is because when you then first of all, of course, forever and always shall be written on my tombstone one day, which I hope is very far into the future. Presidents vote on realignment. I have said that for a very, very long time. It continues to be true. They are the ones that vote. They are not necessarily the only decision makers in the room. And to say that, well, there was a change in chancellor or president, same kind of role in there. To say that there was no discussion, no unified direction, I don't think would be accurate. And you contrast that with the UNC board member, Dave Goliak, I believe was his name, who came out a couple weeks ago and said, yeah, North Carolina needs to either get out of the ACC or renegotiate the ACC deal and get a bigger chunk of it, or make the deal more valuable, or put themselves in a better situation than they are currently in. When you put those two things together, I have a hard time going down the rabbit hole of interpreting that the only reason that they didn't vote in this matter, which was, I think, sending a message to the ACC, you better make some good decisions or we are going to try to leave as well, or we don't want there to be massive obstacles or massive resistance and pushback to schools trying to leave the ACC and get out of the grant of rights. I don't think you would. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, everybody. Probably not. But maybe. You never know. The question that I also keep coming back to, where does North Carolina go? Like, one thing that I'm consistently amazed throughout this process as the ACC, unfortunately, is on the potential precipice of collapsing. I don't think it has to, just to be clear. I don't want it to, but it could be. That is a realistic possibility. What conference is North Carolina going to be in? They feel kind of like a Big Ten school, but they could be appealing to the SEC because the SEC has got a South Carolina. They don't have a North Carolina. That would be new territory. And the SEC is in a position of great strength and realignment, as I've mentioned before, because they haven't had to expand their geographic reach. They haven't had to go out west to pick up schools and become this big national conference, and they're still one of the two power players. But what happens if the SEC gets on the aggressive? What if they move in a direction in which they decide, yeah, okay, let's expand our reach a little bit. Let's be the SEC and just hope people forget that stands for the Southeastern Conference, or just, assume, probably correctly, that people won't care. Maybe, possibly. I don't know. Because if Florida State leaves and Clemson leaves and then North Carolina leaves, Miami would then be trying to leave. And are they all going to the same league? Who's paired with whom? Could be a lot of fun. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments, as always. By the way, speaking of realignment, the Pac-12 as we know it is done. They played their last official event when Oregon and Oregon State baseball failed to come through in the Super Regionals over the weekend. So the Pac-12 as we know it is now done. But we've got win totals for the Pac-2, 12, you call it whatever you like, and what the next steps could be after, during, or before the season. That's coming up next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality candidates that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. It's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Good price. Terms and conditions apply. Kind of a newsy couple of days in the Pac-12. Most notably, win totals came out, according to our friends at FanDuel for the Pac-12. Yeah, that's right, Pac-12 regular season wins. Oregon State and Washington State, their win totals are, drumroll please, 7.5 each. They both have the exact same win total. I think that's about right. Both have questions at quarterback. Their rosters, if you compare them to the rest of the Mountain West, upper tier. And when you think of a 7.5 win total, You think of conference contender capable. We're going to talk about Arizona later. Plenty of people see them as a Big 12 conference title contender. I don't, personally. I don't put them in the same class as Utah and Kansas State and Kansas or Oklahoma State. I'd put them in that next tier in the Big 12. But for Oregon State, Washington State, remember, group of 5 teams have access, have a path to the playoff. And for these schools, their ability to make the playoff this year hinges, but it's plural. English is hard. They have to win their big rivalry games. Oregon State's got to find a way to beat Oregon. Not going to be easy. Washington State has to find a way to beat Washington. It'll be easier, but still not very easy because Jed Fish has brought in plenty of talent, and Washington has got the same win total, but in a significantly tougher conference with a much tougher schedule over in the Big Ten. But still, I'm glad those matchups are continuing, and I hope they do forever and ever because college football, fundamentally about regional rivalries. Those are the best, most important days of the year. But if they were to go 11-1, would they be in the discussion? Yeah. Now, they wouldn't have a conference championship right here, right now, which is segueing very nicely into my next point. In about a month's time in Las Vegas, the Mountain West Conference will have its media days, and I am almost certain that Gloria Nevarez, the commissioner of the Mountain West, will be asked, as she has many times before, about realignment, what the next moves are. She's been pretty standard with her comments so far in that she's not dodging the question. She's saying we always evaluate opportunities, looking for this, but we're not trying to. We feel like we're in a good spot. We like our member. Like, it's just very pretty standard commissioner talk. But I think the Mountain West Scheduling Alliance with Oregon State and Washington State is pretty telling because on the one side, Oregon State and Washington State may attempt to lure Mountain West schools into their conference. But guess what? That door is open both ways. Gloria Nevarez is going to attempt to lure those schools into the Mountain West and say, let's make this league the premier Western-based football and basketball conference in the country. And you've got a president of Washington State in Kirk Schultz who's been very open about the fact that he believes there should be an elite premier West Coast league. Maybe he views the entire Mountain West as being worth that. Maybe he wants some of them and some of the American, wants to pick and choose a little bit more. But then you would start to push away from that statement, that sentiment, and people can go back on their words. That's happened more than a few times in the realignment landscape in the last several years. But I think for Washington State and Oregon State, they're going to play this season. And one of those teams, it's more likely than not that one of those teams goes under and one of those teams goes over. Let's say one, just pick one. Random. I'll go with Oregon State. I'm not saying it's more likely, Coug fans, just hypothetically. If one of those teams goes 10-2 with that schedule and has a couple of solid Power 5 wins, like let's say Washington State loses to Washington and they lose one other game, but they've got to win over Texas Tech and they win the head-to-head with Oregon State. And then Oregon State is like an 8 or a 9 win team. And Wazoo's sitting there at 10-2 feeling really, really good about the season they just had. You know what they're going to think about at the end of the year? The fact that their access to the playoff is not non-existent, but it is severely depleted and diminished because they don't have a conference championship. Is that going to be tenable for 2 seasons? Could be. Absolutely could. Or do they make a move going into 2025? I would think with the Mountain West media rights deal expiring after next season, that's when the moves are going to take place. I have not wavered off of that belief because that is when everything lines up. It's when the scheduling alliance would end, the temporary partnership with the West Coast Conference for the non-revenue sports and basketball would come to a close. Washington State and Oregon State will be on the market. And certainly, as I talked about on Friday's show, they'll try and shop themselves to the Big 12 and the ACC because if you can get an invite there, you could make a case that's a preferable option. Is the stability great? Perhaps not. You could argue there's more stability, even if you talk about the Big 12, which is certainly a more stable situation in the ACC by a landslide right now. That's not even kind of close. Would you rather go to a conference that is significantly behind the Big Ten and the SEC, but is trying to compete at that level? Or would you rather formulate a league that could perhaps one day have its own playoff and national championship? Some people are going to answer that question one way. Most people would probably say, oh, you got to go into the Big 12 and ACC. Some people might say, and I think that you can be plenty reasonable and think either one of these things. But the other side of that coin is, well, if we're not going to get to the same level as Georgia and Alabama anyway, why don't we just define success as competing against like-minded, similarly leveled universities and football programs? Why don't we just do that? I don't think that's a completely flawed way of thinking. But when the Mountain West Media Days happen in early July, I will be watching for what Commissioner Navarez says about where she feels the conference needs to go. What steps do you need to take to ensure that your league has long-term success and viability? And one of the ways that you can do that is make a pitch to Oregon State and Washington State. And one of those pitches should certainly be, do you see that team over there? Whoever it is, let's say it's Tulane, for instance, who may be coming up as a subject later this week on the show. See how they won the American Conference Championship? They had a 10-2 regular season. Then they beat Memphis, for instance, who had a 9-3 regular season. They beat them, and now they're in the playoff. And do you see, Oregon State, how you went 10-2, but you don't have that opportunity? The only way either of these schools, Oregon State, Washington State, get into the playoff this year, they'd have to win minimum 11 games, probably 12. Now, if you win 12 games, you're probably in. That is not hyper. You would have multiple quality Power 5 wins, and you would have gone through an entire Mountain West slate and been unbeaten. Yeah, go 12-0, you're in. That's not going to happen for either of these teams. Not just because, they have to play each other, so one of them is guaranteed to have at least one loss, but because I just don't think they have the teams to go 12-0, because it turns out that is immensely difficult. So I just wonder about what their next steps are and how this football season feels to them. Is it exciting? Is it fun? Is it worthwhile? I think it will be. I think it absolutely can be. The Mountain West has played a lot of great football over the years. But what does it feel like to have Oregon State and Washington State there? How do they compare themselves? How do they view themselves to the teams they're actually going to be playing? Last week I was talking about the leagues that they would like to be in, but what about the situations they're currently in? How's that going to feel? We don't know. It's going to feel different once conference play, quote unquote, begins for the Pac-2, and they start playing that Mountain West schedule, and you go, wow, this is, are they just way above? Are they falling back to that level? We don't know. But what we will know is by the end of the year, whether or not they are going to feel a greater sense of urgency or need to go out there and join a conference. Or have something. Can they go through 2025 and say, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We can do this again and then make a move in 2026, and we'll have 2 seasons where we're just playing good football, building a culture, showcasing our programs, establishing, a credibility with our coaches and letting them showcase what they can do in these respective cities, and then we make our move in 26. Maybe. But I'm more than a little bit curious. But the win total's actually being out. If you got questions about that, want me to break them down? Over, under? Oof. Overs and unders in June. We're not that far out from prediction season, which starts on this show probably end of July, early August. I would guess, because there are a lot of teams to cover, naturally. One of those teams is going over, at least one. At least one of Oregon State, Washington State is going over 7.5. Both? I don't know. I got to let that marinate a little bit. I already have my take on Arizona, though. Some people don't like it. But we'll talk about what they can achieve right after this. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and so much more. You can bet it all, literally all of it, on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Plus, you know this wonderful sport of college football that I love talking about, you love consuming in various mediums, which I'm very appreciative of. You can bet everything you could possibly want over at FanDuel. Yeah, they got it all. They have got it all. Win totals, conference championship odds, national title odds, make the playoff, miss the playoff. You can get it all over at FanDuel. $200 is out there for you in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Everything you want, they've got it. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. So I have been open, honest, and consistent, as I often try to be on the show, on how I feel about Arizona. And I don't think they're missing a bowl game this year. I also don't think they're contending for a Big 12 championship this year. And some Arizona fans are not keen on me when I say that. They did pick up a running back in the transfer portal recently. Did not hate that move whatsoever. But I got what you would call a hot take from A.H.R. Arzul, anyway, who thinks that Arizona can go unbeaten. Now, on the surface, this is a patently ridiculous notion. I am unaware of any time in which a team with a preseason win total of 7.5 went undefeated. I would imagine every undefeated team in the regular season in college football has had a preseason win total of at least 9.5. Vegas, believe it or not, this may shock some of you out there. Vegas knows what they are doing. They do not make that many mistakes. They make them. I thought Arizona's preseason win total last year was the easiest over in the Pac-12. It was 4.5. I looked at that and said, oh, give me a break. That is just way over. Way over. They went 9-3. They went 9-3. So Vegas has whiffed on them before. I don't think they've whiffed on them here. It opened at 8.5, by the way, dropped down to 7.5. Some say the influence of this show on the gambling market is extensive. There are multiple data points to indicate as much. I'm just saying. Starting 5-0 alone is going to be a tall task for Arizona. Because this schedule to begin the year, yikes. They got to play 3 road games in a 5-week span across 4 games with a bye. They start with a cupcake against New Mexico. Poor New Mexico. Poor New Mexico. They're going to be on ESPN. They're going to go to Arizona Stadium, and Bronco Mendenhall's team has the lowest win total I have ever seen. Literally. I have never seen a win total of 1.5. I need to double check that it's still there, because 1.5... 1.5. Oh no. That is an oh no, as Tom Haverford from Parks and Recreation would say. New Mexico win total. Wait for it. Oh, it's been bumped up to 2.5. Should have hit the over while you could. I also said that there might be a little bit of value there. Okay. Anyway, back to Arizona here. Going undefeated is patently absurd. But what can they actually accomplish here? That is going to depend on how they navigate the first half of their schedule. Because they open with New Mexico. Okay, that'll be a win. Then they host NAU. Okay, that'll be a win. Then in a non-conference game, oddly enough, even though they're in the same conference, they play at Kansas State. Then they get a bye. Then they get to go at Utah. Now, they're going to be supremely rested for that game, because that Kansas State game is on a Friday. It's going to be on Fox, by the way. It's going to be an utterly fantastic game in Manhattan at Bill Snyder Family Stadium. And right now, if you put a gun to my head and said you have to pick the game, I'm taking Kansas State. I like Chris Kleiman's team. I think they're really, really good. And they're a bona fide Big 12 contender, more so than Arizona. So Kansas State, but it's on a Friday, so you get an extra day and a bye, and then you have to go at Utah. Good luck. Good luck. You know how many teams have won at Rice-Eccles Stadium since 2018 when fans are actually in the stands? one. Just one. Just one, which is a great game, by the way. If you've never played it, it's a collaborative team game. You're trying to get somebody to say a specific word, and you have to put down just one word. And if you have duplicates, they get canceled. It's a really fun game. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. Anyway, so those two games alone, if you go 1-1 there, you're doing great. Come back home against Texas Tech. I hope you don't overlook the Red Raiders in that spot. I wouldn't. Then the next week, you go at BYU. Now, that's a game you should win. But here's a game, and look, Arizona fans, you know deep down in my heart, I love and appreciate you. I would be a little bit scared of that October 19th game against Colorado. Spencer, you're just trying to hype up Colorado. Well, Colorado fans also think I don't like Colorado. Well, not all of them. Depends on who you ask. But Colorado is not a team that is to be trifled with. That is a bowl team. That is not a Big 12 contender, but that is a bowl team. I think that game, after playing at BYU, and you don't have a big rival looming the next week, it's West Virginia, which, by the way, not an easy football game. Then they go at UCF, not an easy football game. These are just, this is a gauntlet of a Big 12 schedule. I would honestly be more inclined to peg Arizona as a Big 12 title contender if their schedule wasn't so absolutely atrociously hard. Now, the last 3 games of the season, much more manageable. Host Houston, at TCU, host ASU. Should win at least 2, if not 3, of those games. We'll see what TCU is and whether or not they can bounce back under Sonny Dykes this year and their new defensive coordinator, Andy Avalos. But the first half of that schedule, look, if Arizona starts out 4-2, honestly, that might be better than what I end up picking them on a game-by-game basis. Because at Kansas State and at Utah, I have a really, really tough time. I have a tough time. And between Texas Tech at BYU, which will be a crazy environment, fans show up over there. I've been to that stadium to call a game before, and their fans are outstanding. I don't think their team's going to be very good because their quarterback, I mean, you talk about having a quarterback gap in that game. Oh, goodness. BYU might have the worst quarterback room in the Big 12, and Arizona has one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 in Noah Fafita. That's a big gap. So when you have a quarterback deficit like that, it's tough to win the football game. I can see Arizona winning all 3 of those games. 2-1 is also not an unreasonable stretch from October 5th to October 19th. So as I go through the schedule, I see at least 3 losses in there, maybe 4. I think the ceiling, to answer the fundamental question here, the first question was, Spencer, do you think Arizona could go unbeaten? And no. That's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, Arzul, to burst your bubble. Arizona's not going unbeaten this year. They're not going to get close to it. Best case scenario is 9-3. That is with multiple things going right. I would predict Arizona to go 7-5 before I predict 9-3 because this schedule is so brutal. It's not like I think they're going to be terrible or miss a bowl game. But think about how many teams on here. Kansas State, Utah, 2 preseason odds favorites to win the Big 12. You play those teams consecutively. You've got a bye sandwich in between. Whoop-de-doo. Texas Tech, not a bad football team. In fact, a good one. They have had a fantastic, you talk about having a great transfer portal offseason. Texas Tech has been great. I would not overlook Colorado, who Arizona almost lost to. Granted, it was on the road, but Colorado's a better team this year. Then you come back home and play West Virginia. Neil Brown and Garrett Green won 9 games together last year. They're probably going to win at least 6-7 this year, if not more. And then you go at UCF, and that's a team that people have high hopes for in the Big 12 this season. So I think that schedule for Arizona is among the toughest. Colorado's is also fairly difficult. I have not done a Big 12 comparison of who's got the hardest schedule, but man, Arizona's got to be up there. Arizona's got to be up, especially if you factor in what is essentially a 10th conference game in the Big 12, and it happens to be Kansas State. I mean, you couldn't have picked a Cincinnati in there or Houston as a non-cut. They play Houston in the conference slate, but that's tough. That's really, really tough. So I think the absolute ceiling for Arizona is 9-3, and That's if every single thing were to go, not every single thing, obviously, but if more things than not were to go very, very right and bounce Arizona's way and they get a couple breaks, they go 9-3. But I think this is a minimum 4-loss team, and that's why I don't see them as a Big 12 contender. Just the way I feel. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.